two things don't have those numbers: victory and knowledge.
So the tall guy is only the photographer.
In the pictures, he can pretend like there were masses.
Yes. Maybe we don't want to do that. We don't want to pretend that.
How many people submit for this question?
Last week I had 17.
17?
Yes, and then one after the other dropped out. Oh, there are examinations. Oh, I have something else to do. Oh, it's too much work, and so on and so forth. So, what can you do? People sign up, you accept them, you're happy, and then you get one email after the other. Oh no, I can't come, too much other work. There was one woman who said, oh, I made a mistake, I thought it was in the morning, and now it's in the afternoon, I can't come. Things like that.
Oh my God.
Good. I'll have to find out something for that, mister, but you can start whenever you want. From now, it's in your hands. But I will return in a minute.
Take off. All right, well, that will definitely make our life simpler. Since I don't have to pretend that I'm handling one of my classes. I assume you know something about me. But we'll get to that. What I do normally is that I teach at UCLA law school. I'm a law professor, so I teach law. Most of my courses have to do with Islamic law, but there are other fields that I teach, such as sometimes law and terrorism, or human rights law, and, political asylum law, things like that. Normally, I'm accustomed to, in law classes, I have fairly big numbers of students, which has a disadvantage, is that you don't really pay much attention to any one student. You'll have to cover a certain amount of technical material, and that's that. But on the other side, I have quite a few doctoral students, and this feels like more of a meeting of my doctoral students, which are a select group. We usually meet, actually most are usually at my home, and go through their work and so on. What we are going to start with is that I want to know more about you and why you have not dropped this class, since this seems and perhaps, perhaps then I can persuade you to drop the class. That would make life much easier. But so, you're going to, I need to know something about you, and be as detailed as you wish. By inclination, if you stay on, I think you will you will come to discover this by yourself, is that I am inclined towards, you want to call them existential questions, philosophical questions, abstract questions. So when I say who are you, it doesn't mean what is your name and what country you come from. Who are you? In the plane of continuous existence, what does your consciousness represent? And nothing less will do. But of course, at a simpler level, what do you expect from my consciousness? Because that's part of what do you expect from this interaction? And I want to tell you one more thing before I actually listen to you instead of talk. That initially, I'll be very honest with you. Why I agreed to do this and why I'm here. I've had a full year of teaching at UCLA Law School, and so by the time you're done teaching, you frankly you can't stand students anymore. You want to get your research to your books. You've dealt with students all year, and it's like, okay, leave me alone. I just want to go sit with my book somewhere. So this I accepted because I don't claim to be a detached, I don't claim detachment or objectivity. I don't believe these exist. And in fact, I don't believe they're ethical qualities. I don't believe that someone who's truly detached from anything in life is a healthy person. I think they're psychotic and maladjusted and so on. And my perception when I visited Tilburg before, I gave the speech during graduation, was there was a remarkable amount of suspicion and what I would call I call it by its name, religious bigotry directed at Muslims, but also a sort of a tumultuousness in the process by which Muslims themselves define themselves. And so when Tilburg asked me to offer a master class, my primary thought was that I would be doing a public service, if you will, but public service at the European, if you will, at the European level, public service outside my normal country, the United States, in trying to get a more intelligent, more probative, more informed discourse about a tradition that I think as we go on along and together, I see as critical to humanity. In fact, arguably a tradition that defined how even the West sees itself today. There's a scholarly opinion that says that the West, the idea of the West as a unit, was formed in reaction to the idea of Islamdom. But these, of course, are all fairly complicated debates, and maybe we'll have a chance to get into them but fascinating and relevant. So of course, ideal is one thing and reality is another. So the ideal was that you come, you do public service, you help educate people, and so on. The reality is, it seems that very few have use for that service. So what do we do? Well, I'll tell you something that I consider probative in my own life, in my own experiences. A few years ago, I tend to push students hard, and I'm probably at one point, even in Malaysia, I got some articles were written about me because I went and told a group of students in the classroom off. Told them that they're all intellectually lazy and that they're the cause of the backwardness of civilization and things like that. So, one of these experiences I went to it was sort of a master class, but it was 1 week, and it was at the University of Leiden, and there were initially quite a few people. I have this annoying habit that I believe that if you make a claim about something, you should know what you're talking about. I don't. I don't like. It's one thing to seek to know. It's another to say I know. There's a huge difference. So, at any case, I ended up in that class with 2 people. So less than this. Less. And both, after the end of our session, ended up following me to the United States. They came to UCLA to do their doctorates. Gladly, both of them are now finished. Just a couple of weeks ago, one of them just defended his dissertation. He wrote a wonderful dissertation on the dynamics of custom in the development of Sharia. The other person wrote a spectacular dissertation on the ethics of identity among American Muslims, and engaging some of the major orientations in Islamic theological ethics and so on. And thank God, both of them have job offers. One is starting at the University of Tennessee next semester, and the other is going to be closer to UCLA. He's been hired by a school called Loyola Marymount. So this experience ended up, I mean, when you think about it, it was worth quite a bit. If I would do it over again, these 2 students, not only did I leave a big impact on their life, but I learned a lot from them, and it was the quality of the students, the quality of the interaction. I'll tell you that for me, I've you might have heard that, I don't know. you don't know how much people already know about you. So if I'm repeating things that you already know, then forgive me. What do I do with my existence is go around nothing but books, basically. I live in a cocoon of books. I have a library that now the insurance company tells me is 150,000 volumes. Who knows? But most definitely, I can tell you this, that it is probably in our modern age one of the most valuable private collections on Sharia in existence. It has manuscripts that were collected from anywhere from Egypt to Syria to Malaysia, Indonesia to some even from Ethiopia, some that I tracked down in Bukhara. But I'm not a collector. This library speaks to me, and it is my sublimation. It is where I find the voice of the divine. I even wrote a book about this. It's not one of the books that is on your list, but it's called The Conference of the Books. If you're so inclined, read it. And in the search for, it so happens as a Muslim that the search for identity as a Muslim and as a human being, and as in many different capacities, as a teacher, as a father, as a son, as a husband, as a bad driver in public, as a would-be voter. The search engulfs me, engulfs my soul, my intellect in a constant, continuous process. I am always investigating the place, the balance between things, and I will not. The inspiration for this comes directly from the Quran. The idea of al-mizan, right? How many of you know Arabic, by the way? Okay. We know that much of the theology that you're going to hear about, if you last with me the 2 weeks and you don't run away, some of critical concepts that they're not fashionable in modern Muslim theologies, but that were core to the creation of the Islamic dynamic in its various manifestations. Ideas like the mizan, the balance, ideas like the qistas, and it's really a qistas, which is literally another word for the measure. Its relation to qist, which is the essence of justice. Adl is formal justice, right? Adl, of course, later on we'll be writing things on the board and all of that. For now, I'm just Adl is the what sometimes in law we call procedural justice, but qist is substantive justice, and qist, as you will, something that we would get into quite deeply. that the engagement by Muslim theologians and jurists throughout history about the relationship between formal justice and substantive justice, the process of justice and the reality of justice. And so when I say that the idea of the balance, the measure, idea of justice is a Qur'anic terminology or a Qur'anic usage that has left an impact upon my psychology, upon my intellect, that has stayed forever. It tells you, or at least I think it tells me, that I find myself awfully serious about what I do. I try to methodically differentiate between affectations, and this is another thing we'll be talking about, religious affectations, if you want to call performance, right? The performance of religion. And which could have many different, think about why we perform religiosity. There's a lot of symbolic things that we communicate through this, right? Sometimes the affectations of religiosity or religious performance cannot be separated from communicating authority. Sometimes it cannot be separated from communicating stature or position. Sometimes it is even a way of communicating with your wife, right? Or your child, or your teacher. Now, but to try to be conscientiously differentiating in a methodical and systematic way between the performance of religiosity and the conscientiousness of religiosity is something that I consider has been the preoccupation of my life. Now, I'll tell you, if I was you at this point, there would be two possibilities, right? I could be sitting there saying, oh my God, I have been looking for this man all my life. Finally getting to the type of questions that I have been searching for. Or I would be saying, oh my God, what is this man talking about? He is insane, and I have no clue what he is saying, and it's a good thing that we live in a system where you don't get shot for dropping a class. But what I can tell you is this, is that none of these concerns, whether they're familiar to you or not familiar to you, come from solely as a sort of as a whimsical growth from the intellect of Khaled Abou El Fadl. These are not a phenomena in one being that God happened to create and they manifest as if a genetic defect with some weirdness. They are from the heart, from the very essence of traditional theological, jurisprudential, philosophical discourses that permeated the Islamic tradition. There was a time, for centuries, in Islamic history, that the failure to be aware of these types of questions, whether you engage them or not, that's something else, but being aware of them. So for instance, think of Ibn Taymiyyah. How many of you heard of Ibn Taymiyyah? Right? Ibn Taymiyyah, yet one of his most influential texts is his response to Greek logicians. Have any of you attempted to read that book? His response to Greek logicians, Greek logic. He has another text that's 8 volumes, sometimes published as 10 volumes, on the relationship between shara and aql, between law and reason. But his response to Greek logic is fascinating because it shows this Ibn Taymiyyah that his rejection of this tradition is very conscientious and very methodical. In other words, he has absorbed that tradition thoroughly, so thoroughly that it is, it may be a bad way to do this, but I just had a student who wrote a paper in his attempt to understand Ibn Taymiyyah's refutation of Greek logicians, which I flunked, because the student, with all his education, could not understand what Ibn Taymiyyah was actually saying. He was not able to differentiate Ibn Taymiyyah's intellectual paradigms from what the intellectual paradigms that we associate or project onto Ibn Taymiyyah. So, point is that this is from the essence, from the heart of the Islamic tradition itself. The Islamic tradition, and I'll put it a different way. Imagine if the Islamic tradition was truly linear. Imagine if the Islamic tradition, as in some circles many of my books have been translated to Arabic, and so I have these debates, and also in Malaysia and Indonesia and so on. So there was a time where I was doing these. Every once in a while, I go and actually engage in some debates about some of my translated works. And one of the points that always come up is whether I am constantly posed in this fashion, by the way, whether I am fracturing authority in Islam in search of richness that does not exist. In other words, the accusation, the argument is that you dilute the notion of authoritativeness in the Islamic paradigm in order to give the impression that the Islamic tradition has a great deal of richness, and that to fill in some of the blanks for these interlocutors, that I attribute views, opinions to the Islamic tradition that never existed in a quest to, if you will, energize something that is not in fact energetic, or differently, in a request to render rich something that is in fact not that rich, or put differently, as the Chief Justice of Afghanistan once told me, said to make, you like to make things complicated that God has created simple. I complicate what is simple. But if this claim is true, have any of you ever attempted to take a look at the sheer magnitude of written heritage of text left by the Islamic civilization? We start out in the first century Hijrah with, I mean, of course, the Mongols have done a crime against history by destroying a lot of manuscripts in Iraq and so on. But nevertheless, we start out with a certain amount of limited texts. Many of the texts focused around the preservation of the Quran or the preservation of the tradition of the Prophet. But then by the 3rd century, we have it literally as if an atomic bomb has gone off full of texts. But what is even, while a lot of scholars tell you by the 4th century there's intellectual stagnation in Islam, but that claim is challenged by the archaeological reality of textuality in the Islamic civilization, because the sheer production of texts in the 3rd or 4th Islamic century, when compared by the production of text in the 6th Islamic century or the 9th Islamic century, it is as if we go from a small atomic explosion to a massive nuclear explosion. This, of course, raises the question: what were Muslims doing producing all these texts? About what? Are they really just repeating the same things over and over? Was it basically that they are writing this sum total, exactly same amount of material, repeating them ad nauseum? For what purpose? What sociological reality would that serve? But is it even verified by the examination of these actual texts, by the substance of these texts? Now, consider this. We study that Sharia reached a stalemate in the 4th century Hijrah, right? This is considered 101, Introduction to Islamic Law. But do you know that actually by the 4th century Hijrah, put it differently, that the 80% of the texts that exist on Islamic law were written between the 4th century Hijrah and the 12th century Hijrah. Books on philosophy. We have this convenient narrative that, Ghazali comes, after Ghazali, philosophy dies, right? Well, you know, remarkably enough, if you search for treatises, for instance, let's just take one, the masterful work of Ibn Aqil, and the number of philosophical commentaries on Ibn Aqil, and you do a simple archaeological calculation, you discover that at the time we are told Muslim philosophy has fizzled out, that only 40% of what the Muslim philosophical texts that will be written have been written. In other words, 60% come post-Ghazali, not pre-Ghazali. But then there are some